as is always the case at LCC. It's fantastic to see a lot of new faces and familiar faces. For the new faces, especially those of you who are younger, and maybe this is the first LCC you've been to, I just wanted to let you know that you have an amazing resource in this room. As I look around, there are some of the icons or veterans of conlanging here at your disposal for you to go up and bug. And we have Sally here, the creator of Quijada. We have Tony, who's the inventor of the Alurso language. We have Jim Hopkins over there with Atlani. These are people who actually live and breathe and speak, are fluent in their conlangs. We have Matt Pearson here, whose Ocunia is as a legend among we legendary conlangers. The grammar amazing. We have Doug Ball here, whose scare language dates back to the is it the early 90s, the 80s? I mean, it's he was doing this before a lot of us. Christoph is one of the stalwarts of the conlang mailing list. We've got some of them. Who am I missing in terms of the old stats here? There's several. We've got Sai, who basically invented the LCC. So anyway, all I'm saying is to the young people or the new people, we've got some of the greats in terms of the historic icons of conlanging here for you to go up and talk to, and they'd love to chat. Anyway, recently this past spring I took a 3-week-long trip in the south of France, and as usual before I go to France every decade or so, I have to usually bone up on my vocabulary. I first taught myself French back in my mid-20s. I've never forgotten the grammar, but the vocabulary, you use it or lose it, and so I always lose it after a couple of years, or these days after about 6 months. So I spent about 4 months before this trip boning up on my French vocabulary, and in doing so, I was more thorough about it than usual. And so I encountered a lot of some new words that I'd never seen before. And when I discovered what some of these new words were in French, it just went off like a light bulb in my mind. We don't have to necessarily look for exoticness or the Whorf hypothesis by looking in strange languages from obscure corners of the globe. We can look right in our own backyard, like the French language, to learn some things about natural language that we can bring directly into our tool set for doing conlangs. And I want to show you a couple of things I found that really can give us some of these insights. So I just want to start off with a true story. When I was a freshman in high school, during the very first week of my freshman Spanish class, Mrs. Avila, the Spanish speaker, asked the class, I want you to use the vocabulary in the back of the glossary of your textbook and what we've talked about this first week to translate the sentence, how do you do? And she asked a particular student, go ahead and do this, and he or she spent a few minutes doing it, came up with, ¿Cómo hace usted hacer? They said, at least they conjugated the verb, but literally, how do you to do, and obviously for those of you who know Spanish or think about Romance languages, this isn't how you say it at all, right? But of course, they're doing what a layperson, a linguistic layperson is going to think is the way language works, a one-to-one correspondence. And of course, no conlanger wants to create a cipher or relex of their first primary language or any other familiar language. So, but then we start to get into this dilemma. So how do I avoid a one-to-one correspondence with my new words that I'm making up, with my natural language or many languages I know, and still remain natural? I mean, clearly I can go off into, bizarre kinds of psychological realms, but if my goal is to create a natural language that could be spoken by the descendants of the Roman garrisons that got left behind in Great Britain, or etc., whatever your natural context, historical context text is for your language, you still want it to be natural. So how do we stay natural yet avoid these one-to-one correspondences? And I'm going to show that just by looking at the differences between French and English in terms of the lexical ranges of words, gives us some big clues on ways you can go about doing this. if we examine some of these differences from a cognitive linguistics perspective, I'm going to be looking primarily at image schemas. Some of you may remember my words about image schemas from way back from the first language creation conference, if you ever were there or if you ever saw the video of that presentation. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. So I'm boning up on my French vocabulary, and I come across this verb in French, enfoncer. Never heard that one. I don't remember that one from previous, learning efforts for French. And what does this word mean? And I see it can be used to translate the verb thrust, and he thrust his hands into his pockets. Say les mains dans ses poches, or it can be used to hammer in a nail. And my informant Christophe here, and my other informant Olivier Simon, who I also spoke to in France, tell me that you don't even need the phrase with hammer blows. You don't even need that phrase, and it still means you hammer the nail in. So, enfoncer must mean to hammer, right? Or does it? We'll find out. He plunged a knife into my back, or he knifed me in the back. Again, we find enfoncer. So far we've got plunging, hammering, thrusting. A wide-ranging word here. Who on earth put that into his head? Put that into his head, an idiomatic phrase. Again, we come from enfoncer. And you can use it to pull your cap down over your eyes. And it even gets into some very idiomatic constructions here about belaboring an obvious point, and the French saying that you are enfoncing, whatever that word is, we still pin it down. So you're enfoncing some open doors, all right? In French, you enfoncer open doors if you're belaboring a point. So if we look up enfoncer in a dictionary, which I think is a pretty good French-English dictionary at home, it says to drive in, thrust in, stick in, push in. Yet we've found it meaning to pull down over, belabor, put something into something, hammer in, plunge, thrust. What does this word really mean? The inability for us to find a one-to-one correspondence with this word for English, it shows a fundamental difference in the way French is focusing on the whole lexicosemantics of these actions we're talking about. English is focusing very much on the means, method, or instrument, hammer, knife, pull down, on how we're accomplishing what we want to accomplish. Whereas French is more interested in the result of what happens. Whatever you're doing to get that nail into that board, enfoncing is going to accomplish it. Whatever you want to do to get that hat pulled down over your eyes, enfoncing is going to accomplish that. All right? So we're talking about enfoncing corresponding to an image schema that signifies that a trajector, for those of you who know a little bit about cognitive linguistics, traditionally we speak of, the trajector is something that moves with respect to something else. The landmark is the thing which is quasi-stationary relative to the trajector. So you got a trajector passing from the exterior of the landmark into the interior or onto the surface of that landmark in a forceful or quasi-forceful manner, and the result is that the trajector becomes lodged there, permanently or semi-permanently or quasi-permanently. And then this whole meaning is expanded, as languages are apt to do, into metaphorical contexts. So the whole idea of enfoncing has to do with this image schema. Now, those of you who may remember my talk from LCC7, most of the image schemas I talked about, I presented little diagram drawings of what the image scheme looks like. I wanted to give you a diagram drawing of this image schema, but unfortunately everything I came up with seemed to have a sexual thing to it, and I didn't think it was appropriate, so I didn't draw it again. So but you can get the idea just from the description. Anyway, there's another word, écraser. Écraser. Here's another word I encountered, and What does it mean? Well, we can écraser a tablet between your fingers, or I can écraser a cat, or I can écraser a fly, or even potatoes. I can put mashed potatoes, swat flies, run over, crush. Now, Christoph informs me that this écrasing the potatoes can also mean that she's getting the potatoes and flinging them against the wall. You're right. So, anyway, you're stubbing out cigarette butts, you're squishing strawberries, you're stepping on feet. So, again, the French word is focusing on the resulting state. And what is the resulting state in all of these? Essentially, image schema-wise, something that was like this is now okay? So, whatever that schema is, that's what écraser is all about. As opposed to English's obsession with describing the specific means, method, or mechanics of how the cat gets, or the potatoes get mashed, or etc. All these other things happen. It goes the other direction too. We have this verb in English, to drain. And when you ask an English speaker, what does drain mean? To drain means to drain, right? But in French, the French don't quite see it that way. If you got swampland or marshland and you don't want it to be swamp or marsh anymore, you don't drain it, you dry it out. If you want your vegetables that you've just rinsed or your dishes that you've just rinsed, and you've racked them up or set them aside for the water to drip off of them, that's what you say is happening. It comes from goop drop. So you're X or de-dropping them. The drops are coming off. Liquids go out of a drain down a pipe. You're deflowing the water in French, literally. So why 3 words in French to translate 1 word in English? We've seen that the French lexicosemantics focus on a resulting state. So what's the resulting state of a drain, swamp, or marsh? It's dry. Thus, asséché, a word derived from, the verb by the adjective sèche, dry. Whereas the resulting state of drained vegetables or dishes is that the drops of water have dripped off of them. Thus, a verb derived from goût, drop, a drop of water. And water flowing out of a sink, well, it has flowed from one container into some other place. Thus, a word derived from couler, to flow. So 3 different concepts in French, corresponding to what we think of as one concept in English. Let's look at the verb to drain, translating it to French. In French, you need 4 different verbs, because French requires you to have this matrix on whether the object or entity can be carried in your hands or arms or not. That's one axis. The other axis being whether we're going away from the speaker or toward the speaker. We don't make these distinctions in English, sort of with the destination away, in that we can also use the take, a verb take, for the same context. But if we think about like take out food, let's bring the Chinese food home, or you can also bring the Chinese food to grandma's, or take the Chinese food to grandma's, it's going away. But we can use either one. French is a little more rigid in terms of what it requires to be lexified based on these contexts. So here we see another way that lexicosemantics of a close language, another Indo-European language, divide up the world. Look at the French word rayon. What does rayon mean? Well, it can mean a beam of light, a ray of light, a gleam, spoke of a wheel, a particular shelf on a bookshelf, the department or section of an office, or like the ladies section of the department store. It can be a single cone and a honeycomb. It can be one specialty or line. Maybe this is my line. One's concern or responsibility, a radius, or the scope or range of something. It seems, from an English-speaking perspective, to be all over the map. But what's the common thread? the fact that we're looking at like a subunit of something else, a particular beam array of the entire shining light, or the particular shelf of a group of shelves, or one's line or sense of responsibility regarding the range. So it's a subset of a range of things that Rayon is basically talking about, and then metaphorically being expanded. So underneath this seeming hodgepodge of meanings, we see a common cognitive thread of meaning, and that's what Rayon is capturing. Try to translate it into French. You're going to need to say a lot of other things instead. He's making an allusion. He's letting me understand. He's giving me an indication of his feelings. He's offering advice to travelers. This one I love. On soupçon. Soupçon is a suspicion. Suspicion of garlic. Take a hint. He understands. I use metaphorical or idiomatic phrase here in the half-word style. And I don't know of melancholy. I love that one. Finally, let's look at descendre, which means in any dictionary to descend, right? Go down, right? Except we find that the range is different in French because we can use it transitively with objects. Can't do that in English. And in very interesting ways where descendez-moi les lunettes. Imagine translating that literally into English. Descend me my eyeglasses. And of course we can use it metaphorically, even conceptual metaphors, just like English, where a boy ran down the street. The boy has gone down the street running. Once again, along a street away from the speaker is conceptualized metaphorically as downward motion, a standard Lacan style conceptual metaphor. Anyway, for common language, what does this mean? Consider whether your speaker should focus on the resulting state of an action or the means and method. Consider this perspective toward or away from the speaker, or the situational aspects, such as whether you can carry it in your hand. And the word in many translations can convey one underlying image schematic concept. We saw that with Rayon. And expanding the lexical range of a word compared to your language, or your primary language, as we saw with French, descendre having a wider usage than descend. I think that's it. Questions?